In 1991, an album came out that changed the game for me. This era in hip-hop was an interesting transition. Around this time in the early 90s, the house party, have a good time dancing, bright colors, funky polka dot high top fades era was dwindling. Starting to replace it was what would be later titled by the media as gangsta rap. One of the first that I was introduced to, after Ice-T and NWA, of course, was a rapper from Compton by the name of High C. I loved his voice, I loved his flow, and I loved his look. I'm sold. But it wasn't those three things I mentioned that made me play High C over and over and over again. It wasn't his flow. It wasn't his style necessarily. It wasn't his look. It was his production on the songs. The beats on that album were dope. It was something like I had never heard before up until that point in my life. Songs like I'm Not Your Puppet and Sitting in the Park Waiting for You. I mean, little did I know back then that High C's beats were produced by this Mexican kid from Wilmington named Tony A. At the time, I knew nothing about Tony A. In hindsight, I've come to realize he was a very important figure in the history of West Coast hip-hop. Everything from beat making to DJing to producing his own mixtapes, Tony A was the epitome of a West Coast hip-hop pioneer. I got the chance to interview Tony A and ask him about his life and his career. Here is Tony A discussing what it was like growing up in Wilmington, California, and discovering his passion for hip-hop.
Well, let me go a little bit back before that. What's funny, even though I don't claim Compton, when my family first came from Mexico, they moved to the city of Compton. And though I was born here in the city of Torrance, when I was 9 years old, we moved to the city of Wilmington. And here's pretty much where I grew up at. What a lot of people don't know as well is that growing up here in Wilmington back then, like now it's predominantly all Mexican, but in the 80s, it was predominantly black and Mexican.
Okay.
So it was all out war here in this city in the 80s, bro. I mean, blacks were killing blacks, Mexicans were killing Mexicans, and Mexicans were killing blacks. They were killing each other here. And it's funny, in the 7th grade, I got to meet a certain individual, and he became a good friend of mine for at least a good year. We became really, really good friends. And for during the summer, I followed him all around Wilmington, holding the boom back so he could teach me how to pop. And that was Boo Lucian and Michael Chambers' Turbo from Breaking.
Yes.
And so I also dabbled a little bit in popping and breaking and stuff like that. But he's actually from my neighborhood. Now, in 11th grade, I had no business. My first job was selling records.
Okay.
I was selling records at the Vermont Swap Meet in the city of Gardena. It is no longer there, but for those old school heads that have heard of it, it used to be right across from a racetrack called Ascot in the city of Gardena.
Okay.
And I was selling records when I first met Steve Yano. So I was selling vinyl. I've always been selling vinyl, and I've always been a vinyl collector, and I've always been familiar with music since my youth. 12 years old now. I graduated to 6th grade. My brother was DJing at a club in Long Beach. That club actually had 3 different names within 1 decade. It was called Noah's Ark, Infinity, and Grand Central Station. And in the mid to late 80s, it became a straight Crip club. All the Crips from Long Beach, from insane Crips were all there, man. And so my brother was actually DJing at that club. I wanted to go to that club because I would always see him get dressed up and go DJ. Well, he tells me, if you graduate to 6th grade, you get to come with me. I'll sneak you in.
Okay.
And it was an 18 and over club. But I will say this, man. I was 12 years old, and I had no business being in a nightclub, bro. And I'm going to tell you why. So if any parents are listening, do not let your kids go to a nightclub at that young age. Because after that, bro, I didn't want to do school no more. All I thought about was music.
As I mentioned before, Tony A was born and raised in Wilmington, California, a rough area in the South Bay of Los Angeles County. Now, for anyone not familiar, it's pretty much near Long Beach. It goes down in Wilmington. Not just today, but especially in the 80s and 90s when Tony A was coming up. Active sets roamed the streets and terrorized the community. Through all of the madness, Tony A was creating magic. Let's get back to the interview. But before we do, I'm going to ask you all to hit that like button if you haven't already. And if this is your first time joining the channel and you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button. Here is Tony A talking about some of the early artists in Los Angeles blowing up, especially NWA before they were NWA.
I know everybody's heard of NWA by now, but I had the opportunity and I was blessed to have met them when they first formed NWA. So I didn't know that they were going to blow up the way they did. And it was 1985 when I first heard my first Roadium mixtape. Now, I had known Steve prior to this. A lot of people don't know that he was at the Vermont Swap Meet in Gardena. And I worked with him till I was about 13. Then he moved to the Roadium. So I didn't see him again till I was about 19 years old.
So the Roadium was a swap meet in L.A., right?
Correct, in the city of Gardena.
Yep, okay, go ahead.
So what happened was, one of my friends was playing an old school mixtape. I want to say it was late 86. And he was playing a tape called 85 Live. And I heard Dr. Dre on that cassette say, "Yo, what's up? This is Dr. Dre, and I'm right here with my friend Steve at the Roadium Swap Meet, and we're about to cold tear shit up." And I go, "Stop, who's that?" And he said, "That's Dr. Dre." Now, back then, Dr. Dre was, like, to me, a turntable god from the world-class wrecking crew.
Yep.
You know, I mean, not just the wrecking crew, but the world-class wrecking crew. You know, not knowing that he was broke, and I didn't care. To me, he was like my idol to me.
Yeah.
You know? So I said, he said, "Steve, there's only one Steve that I know, and he sells at the Roadium." So I made that connection. That day I happened to go. It was late 86. And I walk up to Steve, and he recognizes me right away. I was about 19, probably 18 at the time. And he says, "Tony, hey, what's up, man?" Well, back then he just knew me as Tony. I said, "Hey, what's up, Steve?" And he goes, "You know who this man is, right?" And he had Dr. Dre there at his booth at the Swap Meet.
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I know who that is." Now, I didn't know who Jinx was, but Jinx was there, his nephew. But she was probably about 16 at the time. And then he introduced me to Eric, which was easy.
Yep.
And I didn't know who none of those guys were, just Dre.
This is before Boys in the Hood, before all of that, right?
Before, yes.
Yeah.
Before all of that. Because Boys in the Hood, the first press came out in 87. And I remember because Easy hadn't spelled his name with a Z yet. He had spelled his name with an S. EASY. As a matter of fact, I still have that vinyl, you know. And they played it to Macola. So Steve asked me, "Hey, you know, you want to go ahead and cut it up? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm DJing." So we'll cut it up. So I had the opportunity to mix in front of Dre. Dre tapped me in the shoulder, said I did a great job. I'm going to hook you up with my boy, my cousin Jinx. He's doing a record. He's got a rapper named Dazzy D from South Central. Want you to do some scratching on it. Okay, cool. So that was my first time that I ever did scratching on vinyl, was for Sir Jinx and a rapper named Dazzy D. And people know Sir Jinx being the producer of Ice Cube and actually No Vaseline, to me, the greatest diss song ever.
Yes.
You know, and if you really think about it, how ironic is it that Dre's cousin produced this song for Ice Cube to diss his own cousin?
Yeah. You know, it bothers me when I hear people try to discount or take away the contribution of Latinos to hip-hop music. If it weren't for Latinos, a lot, dare I say, most of the successful rappers we know today, especially on the West Coast, would not be around. Their contribution to this culture we call hip-hop is unmatched. But that's why I'm here, to show love to my brown brothers who often get overlooked in this hip hop game. That's why I'm here, to give you the real, true story of West Coast hip hop history. And Tony A was a big part of that. Comment down below, why do you think Latinos often get overlooked when it comes to what they have done for hip hop? I'd love to hear your opinion. But before you do, hit that like button for me one time. And if this is your first time joining the channel and you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. Let's jump back into the interview with Tony A. In this clip, we discuss the mixtape scene in the 80s on the West Coast and how Dr. Dre got him into the game. Real hip-hop history right here. Pay attention.
The very first record that ever came out of VIP Records in Long Beach was a record label called Thin Line Records. And Calvin Anderson, the owner, put up the money. He was executive producer for Sir Jinx and Dazzy D. And I did the scratching on it. That came out in 1987. The song's called You Better Think. So I have VIP history as well for being the first record ever sold out of VIP under the VIP record label. And then I met Eric, and it was funny because the thing that stood out to me about Eric, I remember he was wearing a Raiders hat, a white T-shirt, 501s, and some Air Force Ones. And I remember I told Steve Yano, which was the Japanese man, I go, hey man, I don't know if you want to tell your friend, but he left the price tag on his shoes. Oh, you know? Yeah. And he goes, yeah, that's just the way they wear them.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of, you know, today people don't do that, but that was like an 80s thing.
Yep.
And then Dre, on his LA baseball cap, he left the price tag as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I remember telling him, hey, it still says 1999 on your hat. And he was like, yeah, I know. I didn't quite get it yet, you know, but you know what? In that movie Straight Outta Compton, when Dre leaves his mom's to go live with Jinx in South Central, that was at the time when I met them.
Okay.
So I was going over there, and that's when Jinx was producing for Dazzy D, and I did the scratching and stuff like that. But I would say those are the guys that I met, and eventually, a couple of weeks later, I met Ice Cube, Ram, Yella, and the whole camp, DOC, Michelet. So I met that whole camp before their vinyl ever even came out. According to the history of the mixtapes, Steve had Dre started him around late '83, but he wasn't rapping on them just yet. It wasn't until like '85 that Dre started rapping on them. He would have Eazy-E, he would have Cube, he would have Crazy D. Like the whole NWA was coming together. So in '87 was what Supersonic had just came out. Mm-hmm. And I remember Dre, because the original version was produced by the LA Dream Team, Rudy Pardee, Snake Puppy,
Richie
and eventually they got signed over to Ruthless, and Dre reproduced Supersonic. When they released it in '87, Dre told me, he goes, "Hey, I'm not going to be able to do these mixtapes anymore. You want to take over?" And I said, "Yeah, if it's okay with Steve." And Steve said, "Yeah." He said, "I'll come over to your house on Monday, and I'll show you how we do them." Now, keep in mind, up to this time, I thought, I'm being honest with you, they were way ahead of everybody, bro. They were way ahead of the game. I literally thought Dre was using 4 turntables, bro. People may try to lie today. Oh, yeah, I knew they were using a 4-track. That's a lie. Nobody knew. You know, in the 80s, nobody knew that Dre was using a 4-track. So when Steve comes over, he shows me, this 4-track, and I said, "What's that?" He goes, "This is how we're going to do the mixtapes." And I said, "We're not going to use turntables?" Well, yeah, but we transfer it to here. So he's the one that showed me how to use the 4-track.
Nice.
Even up to this day, people who are not, if you will, in the music business, still ask me, "Hey, so was it 4 turntables?" And of course I explained it in the documentary. But it was a Tascam Porter 1, a 4-track. Yeah, so Steve actually is the one that taught me how to use it, because I didn't even know what that was. So Supersonic had just came out, and the first mixtape was called Breakdown. We had nobody rapping on it yet. Now, on the next one, That's when Dre started rapping on them, Q started rapping on them, JJ Fad, and etc. They all rapped on them. So I remember after I did Breakdown in '87, Steve tells me, he goes, by this time next year, you're going to be known on the streets. And I'll be honest with you, man, at that time, here's what I was doing, bro. I was nickel and diming, curb serving, slanging dope, so that I could buy more records, so that I could buy a realistic mixer and some equipment. That's all I was doing. And he would pay me $200 per cassette. A lot of times it came out per month, but it all depended on how fast music came out, because we would put all the latest cuts. When he had enough songs, then he would say, okay, we're going to put together another mixtape. I said, okay. So what happened was 88 Boom and Bass was probably my most popular one out of all of them. That one had a freestyle Eazy-E. That one had Ice Cube rapping on it, JJ Fad, and Tone Loc all rapping. They all did like 16 bars, freestyles, and they would all come to my house. They would all come to my house. And keep in mind, a lot of people always say, how was it working with those? You have to understand that at that time, the records weren't out, so I didn't know if they were ever going to, or if they were actually even going to blow up. But I do remember a year later in '88. I remember one time I was calling my girlfriend from a phone booth, and I remember in my neighborhood there used to be a lot of Bloods, and they were bumping one of my mixtapes, and I heard myself talking on one of them. Yo, what's up? This is Tony A, and they're blooding me. I'm at a phone booth bumping my mixtape.
Oh, dog.
And I'm like, what the hell? I didn't know whether to get scared because they were blooding me, or to feel happy because they were bumping my mixtape. So it was kind of a mixed feeling, but that's when I realized that my mixtapes were getting out.
I love the hip-hop history lesson we're getting. If you appreciate it too, hit that like button for your boy one time. I remember when I first heard High C's Scandalous album. I was like, what the fuck is this? I need more. As I mentioned before, it wasn't only the flows or the style of High C that I was into. It was the beats. It was the production. I loved oldies at that time. I still do. A lot of people who grew up in LA in the 90s loved the oldies. Mary Wells, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Always and Forever, Billy Stewart, James and Bobby Purify. I mean, I actually used to make mixtapes for the girls at school. It was a little player way to get up inside the draws, you know what I mean? But seriously, I myself used to make mixtapes for myself and bump them in my Walkman. Yeah, you kids don't know what a Walkman is, so we'll keep it pushing. But when I heard Sitting in the Park by High C, it was a rap. Sitting in the park, waiting for you. When I heard I'm Not Your Puppet, it was a super rap. I was hooked on this dude's production and a lot of the samples he was using. To this day, I believe that Scandalous by High C is one of the best produced albums that has ever come out of the West Coast. In this next clip, Tony A discusses linking up with High C.
I want to say late '88. I remember seeing this guy with a big old forehead and a long-ass jerry curl. And I'm dead serious. I remember him going to the stand, and I'm there chilling with Steve at the stand because I would always go visit every week. And I heard him say, "Steve, is Tony here yet?" And Steve goes, "Nah." So he leaves, and I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Oh, some guy. He's a blood from Compton. He wants to meet you." And I said, "Oh, is he any good?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, he raps. He's okay. He kind of sounds a little bit like Eazy-E." That's what he said. Mm-hmm. And then I said, "Oh, okay. So what do you want? You want to use him?" And he said, "Nah." And I remember what Steve said. He said, "Well, why use him when we got the original?" Ooh. You know. So I was like, all right, cool, whatever. So when NWA took off on tour, I remember seeing Dre Audio Achievements because he had busted on a mixtape called Recop. And he tells me, hey, we're not going to be able to rap on these mixtapes anymore because we're taking off. I don't know when we're going to be back. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was around the time they went on tour and, you know, in the movie when they took off on tour on their bus.
Yeah.
And when they came back, actually, that's when Ice Cube, you know, stopped by my house. But that's another story. So what happened was when Dre told me that, I had nobody to rap on my mixtapes anymore. So I said, who do you want to get? And Steve tells me, well, you can almost go talk to that Blood over there.
That Blood.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, all right. So I went over there and I formally met him. And I remember he tells me, hey, I can rap. You know, I'm from Compton. I go to Centennial High School. I can go after school if you want. And I was like, yeah, come to my house. I gave him directions, and he came. I remember he came in a white El Camino with graphics, like totally like 80s. You know, and I remember he was bumping Outstanding by the Gap Band.
Okay.
I thought it was kind of weird because when he took off, on the back of his El Camino, it said Outstanding. So, you know, in gold leaf, you know. But I remember his first rap was a song called I'm Hard, and I thought it was kind of whack.
Mm-hmm.
I just wasn't feeling it, but I liked his voice. So we did a mixtape called Bass Station, and Funky Cole Medina by Tone Loc had just dropped.
Mm-hmm.
So I told him, look, bro, if you want to rap, you got to rap off of this, and it's instrumental. And he said, okay. We did another mixtape. After that, we did a house mixtape, and he was rapping to house music. So finally, one day, I want to say it was late, early night, 89, I had two oldies, I'm Your Puppet, and I was cutting them back and forth while Steve was setting up. By this time, we're using an 8-track, Tascam 8-track. This one was like a reel-to-reel. And so High C is rapping, freestyling to this I'm Your Puppet beat. And Steve was a Japanese guy who grew up in Whittier who loved oldies. And he said, I think that is dope. He said, let's do that song on his mixtape. And I said, like, what do you mean, let's do this song? He said, yeah. He said, get an instrumental bottom beat, and we'll write it over. I'll let you do cutting and scratching, and we don't even need a chorus. So we did it. And that one sold. I remember Steve said, back then, if we had a record, like a sound scan on mixtapes, he said, that mixtape would have went gold.
Damn, that mixtape, wow.
You know? Yeah, so he said, let's do a follow-up to I'm Not Your Puppet. And I named it, and I came up with a lot of lyrics, even though High C literally wrote it, but I gave him ideas. And so we did, I just flipped the record over because I had no idea what we were going to do. And Sitting in the Park was on there. So I said, let's use this. He goes, let's go with it. High C rapped to it. You know, the chorus came out dope, so we did it on a mixtape. And you know what? We weren't even looking for a record deal, man. We're doing it because we were having fun. I was making $200. And finally, somebody came from Disney to our record stand at the Swan meeting and said, who did this? And since it was a white guy, we thought they were going to bust us for selling bootlegs. You know?
Yeah.
So Steve told them, well, he does it. And he pointed at me, and I said, yeah, well, he sells them.
Damn, Steve.
Yeah. So that guy tells me, well, I want to sign this. I work for Disney. We just opened up a record label called Hollywood Records, and this ended up on my desk, and I like it.
Damn.
So, yeah, we set up a meeting, and he signed us for a single deal, which was $40,000. The single sold really, really well, and then he offered us $100 for the album. So we were the first rap act to be signed at Disney.
I hope you're enjoying this interview. If you are, hit that like button. Comment down below. What are some albums that you personally think are underrated? What albums do you think were ahead of their time but didn't get the proper shine? Let me know in the comment section. Now let's get back to the interview. In this next clip, Tony A discusses the one and only DJ Quik.
High C would always talk about DJ Quik, DJ Quik, DJ Quik. And then when I met DJ Quik for the first time, we were already recording our record at Audio Achievements, where Dre and all those guys did their albums. We were recording there. So I remember when I first saw Quik, he looked exactly the way he did on his Born and Raised in Compton video. He was wearing a trench coat, and he had his hat tilted to the side. That was looking like a 19-year-old pimp, you know? And when I saw him, I remember I told High C, "What the hell is that?" And he was like, "Oh, that's Quik." But I had already heard his Red Tape, and really his Red Tape was just a demo.
Is that the one where he was dissing MC8?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I still have it.
Damn.
You know, and the song was called Real Dope.
Okay.
You know, and it was funny because, in my opinion, I'm 50 years old, bro. I mean, you know, I was like 21, 20 years old when I met Quik.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think it was that bad of a diss. But it blew up, you know, on the streets. And I remember when, at that time, I didn't know MC8. I had just known of CMW, you know. And because Steve had introduced me to Lonzo, DG Slip, and all those guys that were over there at Lonzo's camp. And so I met DJ Quik at the studio. I shook his hand. And I remember every time I would see him, he would always ask me Dr. Dre questions. Hey, is this board fully automated? Hey, how does he pan this? You know, he would always ask me engineering questions. But, you know, and to me, in my opinion, DJ Quik is a musical genius, bro. Especially when it comes to engineering. Hey, he don't even have to rap or perform anymore. I just believe he can spend the rest of his life just engineering projects because he is that good. And so he told me back then, and he actually told me this about 2 weeks ago. He said, "Man, when I first heard you scratch on those mixtapes, he goes, the way you made those records talk, man," he goes, I even said, "Shit, I need to hang it up because this guy's better than me." And when he told me that back then, and even just recently, I asked him, "Dude, were you serious about that?" And he was like, "Yeah, bro." I said, "Yeah, I never heard anybody do that, bro." He goes, and I remember when I did my demo, he said, I bit some of your style. And I was like, wow, you know, I didn't know that. And as a matter of fact, on his documentary, his manager, Pretty Greg, actually admits that that's what they did. But I made Quik when I want to say, shoot, maybe 19, 20 years old. But he was already so dope back then, bro. I mean, he was really, really good. You just knew that it was only a matter of time before this guy took off.
Yeah.
You know, and at the same time, I met, you know, AMG, Second to None of those guys. When I met AMG, he was known as Spin. He wasn't known as AMG. So I was still calling him Spin, and then one day he just tells me, "Hey, man, my name's AMG now." And I go, "How the hell are you going to switch from one day to the other?"
Without telling.
You know, yeah. So yeah, that's AMG now. So
I'm really enjoying this interview, and I hope you are too. And if you are not aware, Tony A has a podcast he does on YouTube and other platforms titled Roadium Radio. That's Roadium Radio on YouTube. Tony discusses lots of the topics on his show that we discuss here, but his main focus is hip-hop, more specifically West Coast hip-hop. So make sure you go check out Roadium Radio and let him know Dusty Vision sent you. Have you ever heard the name Violet Brown? Violet Brown, a little white lady who has done more for hip-hop than most people. Violet Brown is a name that you are probably unfamiliar with, but in reality, she has worked with some of your favorite artists. Not only that, she's most likely responsible for their careers. And that's why I get so upset when I hear people, specifically black people, say whites and Latinos are guests in hip-hop. If it weren't for white people and Latinos, hip-hop wouldn't have made it as far as it did. Let's keep it real. There, I said it. Now what? Shut up and get at me in the comment section, but come with your proof, because I'm always going to bring receipts. In this next clip, Tony A discusses just how important Violet Brown, this little white lady, was to hip-hop.
Oh, wow. Violet Brown. Wow. Now, you're asking me a big question in which I cannot give you a small answer for, but let me tell you this. And for the people that are listening right now, Violet Brown had the power. And I believe it to a certain extent even now because her name pulls so much weight. Let me just throw some names out there of people that have actually know her on first name basis, like Dr. Dre, okay? Puffy, Master P, Eminem, 50 Cent, Snoop Dogg, just to name a few. She's known everywhere. She had the power that, let's just say your record drops today, this morning, tomorrow you could be certified platinum. She had that kind of power.
What does she do? Like, who is she? Explain to the audience who she is and what she does.
Well, let me just tell you how. First of all, she started as a DJ.
Okay.
She had an ear for music.
Okay.
She had an ear for talent. Most people back then who worked for record labels used to call her to be a consultant. So it would be like you calling her and saying, "Hey, Violet, I got 3 demos. I need you to come listen to them. Tell me if they're any good, if they're all good, if some are good, and if not, do you know of anybody that I can sign?" And that's what she would do. She would say, "No, don't waste your time on this one. This guy's good." Or develop him, hook him up with so-and-so. You know, her name pulled a lot of weight because she had a good ear for music. And then eventually she got a job for the music store, the warehouse. This generation doesn't know, but back in the day, we used to have to go to stores to buy vinyl, and cassettes, and eventually CDs. She would have in-store where people would go and sign. So I would go to her job, and she was the head rep, if you will, to buy music. She would say, for an example, I'm going to have 1,000 of your CD Tupac's, at this warehouse, and another 1,000 at that warehouse. And everybody knew her because she had the power to sell and move your units, your copies. So she was a good friend to have, bro, and still is. I had the opportunity to meet her as a young teenager, bro. And me and her still remain really good friends.
Are Mexicans guests in hip hop? In my personal opinion, hell no. They've been in this game since day one. And Tony A is a perfect example. Being a Latino in hip hop in the early days was not easy. In this next clip, we discuss the tension Tony A got for him being Mexican in a predominantly black culture.
Well, you know what? I've only been asked this one other time, and the way the person asked me was this: did you ever experience any racial tension? Being possibly because I shared how as 2 concerts at the Anaheim Celebrity Theater in the 80s, I was backstage with NWA, and I said this. I said, I know this is the black industry. I know that. And me being Mexican going into this industry, I knew that I had to work twice as hard. I'll tell you, it was a very small percentage of, if you will, blacks that showed racial tension and even told me, you're not black, what do you know, type of remarks. I remember Dre one time, he never showed me that. Easy never showed me that. That whole camp never showed me that. Now they would have other individuals that they worked on that would share that kind of stupidity towards me. I remember there was one guy, I won't mention his name, but his record went gold. Dre produced it, and he was playing a record. And he was telling Dre, what do you think about the sample? And I remember Dre said, "What do you think, Tone?" And I said, "I like it." And he told Dre, "What the hell does he know? He's Mexican." That type of stuff.
Yeah.
But
Very
few. Yeah, very few. But to me, I'll be honest, bro, I was always a shit talker. So I'd always talk right back. And I was like, "What the fuck do you know? Who are you?" And I remember one time there's other guy wanted some music from me. Here's the funny part. This was just conversation over the phone. He wanted some music from me, so I mailed him a cassette with my beats. And when I met him, he told me, I didn't know you weren't black. And I said, "Oh, okay." But he wanted to buy my beats up until he met me. And then after that, he just told me, I just want to keep it black. And I said, I said, okay.
Wow.
So,
Keep it moving.
yeah, you know,
Keep it
yeah,
moving.
you know.
Damn.
And then there were times that I would be up on stage, like whether it be Frisco or Texas or here in LA, and I want to get on the turntables because I used to be a really good DJ in the 80s. And they would never let me up there. And I will be honest with you, there were times where they finally let me up there, and I was taking dudes down, man. And that's how I got to get my respect. People started noticing, okay, this guy does know how to DJ. But I think many times they just judge the book by its cover. Yeah. But once again, it was a very small percentage, you know, that did that. But the majority of the time, I got love everywhere.
That's good. Probably especially from the fans. I'm assuming that you had a heavy Latino following because the Sitting in the Park and the I'm Not Your Puppet. Those are, you know, oldies joints. And plus the Latinos loved Eazy-E and I mean NWA.
Yes.
There was probably more Latinos at their shows than there were anything else other than whites.
And still is, bro.
Yeah.
And still is. You know, for a while because I see rapped off for those oldies, and on one song called Jack Move, he actually cussed in Spanish. A lot of people thought for some reason that he was a Mexican guy, like he was, and I was like, no, he's black. Look at him. No, he's got to be half. He's got to be half.
Look at his hair.
And, yeah, exactly. But you know, even now, so I would just tell him, dude, just lie, bro. Show him you're half or something. You know, because Mexican girls wanted to get with him, so he would say, yeah, I'm half, and then they had no, you know.
Love it. Oh, that's great. He lied about his age. He lied about his race. I love that shit.
I really enjoyed the interview with Tony A. I'm just trying to keep the real history of West Coast hip-hop alive. Not only that, I got to show love to my Brown brothers who I feel get left out a lot when the story of West Coast hip-hop is being told. Before we head out, please hit that like button if you haven't already. Just smash it for your boy. I really do appreciate it. And if this is your first time joining the channel and you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button. I'm also on Instagram, Dusty Vision Radio. So please follow me on Instagram. More importantly, please subscribe to me on Rumble. That's RUMBLE. Rumble is an app similar to YouTube. It's a lot more free. It's a lot more open. Not as much censorship as YouTube. Please subscribe to Dusty Vision TV on Rumble. I'm also on Facebook at Dusty Vision TV. I have a pretty big Facebook group. I think we're right around the 10,000 subscriber mark right there on Facebook. So please follow your boy on Facebook. Also, check out my second channel right here on YouTube, Dusty Vision Radio. Dusty Vision Radio on YouTube. And for my real hip-hop heads, the ones who want that real West Coast hip-hop history, uncut, raw, follow NWA Stories with Alonzo. NWA Stories with Alonzo right here on YouTube. My co-host Alonzo Williams and I do a show every single Tuesday where we discuss the real history of West Coast hip-hop. I do appreciate each and every one of you. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.